Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of Superhero Pantheon. My name is Jerome Cuson. You can find me on Twitter at JeromeC1985. My co-host, of course, is, as always, Brian. You can follow him on Twitter at BrianToBrain. And Brian, we're going to be doing something a little bit different here tonight, as we are going to be discussing our top 10 favorite superhero performances. We have watched so many of the superhero movies over the course of the last 3 years, from Batman 1966 to even projects that were in 2020, like the Old Guard. So we have covered the gambit of superhero movies. Originally, we were going to review Jupiter's Legacy this week, but we will talk a little bit why we are not going into the full review next week, our final review, our final show before we go on a 3 month hiatus. But here tonight we are going to discuss our favorite superhero performances. And Brian and I have not told each other any aspects of our lists, but we do have our top tens, and we have them pulled up, so we're ready to go. And I also have some honorable mentions that I will be mentioning afterward. And certainly, if Brian has honorable mentions as well, then he will also mention his. But we're going to get into the top 10 in just a moment. Brian, first of all, are you ready? Do you have your list ready to go?
Yes, I do, and I'm glad you mentioned the whole honorable mentions thing because I it was really hard, probably about 7 to 10, but I got like five extras I want to mention at the end of the show. Also, this is probably let's just get this way out of the ahead of time. Like, probably most likely, what Joker's not going to be on your list, Jerome, because we obviously haven't put it or reviewed it for the Pantheon yet. I know that's a major big deal, but I want to just like maybe honorable mention it from the start, just because me and Jerome kind of have mixed feelings on the movie anyway. Even though it is like it won Best Actor, Joaquin Phoenix won Best Actor, but I just want to point out at ahead of time it's most likely not going to appear on our list because we haven't even reviewed it yet, and like I said, we have mixed feelings on it.
And we will not review it because it is not a superhero movie, so we shan't review it.
Well, that's the other caveat too. That's it's a villain movie, but it's got DC characters, but it's not going to be on the list, unfortunately. It's just the way it is. So.
With good reason. I am so glad that we have an easy pretext to not talk about and me have to rewatch that movie. I am just very, very satisfied and very glad about that. So I will say that putting this list together was difficult, and I definitely struggled with who to put, especially at the bottom. I feel pretty confident, if I'm being honest, about my top five. And then, really, I thought the 6 through 8 were going to be a little bit on the tough side, but it eventually settled in. And basically, I feel pretty good. And really, what actually made the process of putting this list easier is our rule that basically we are picking out one performance from one movie, and we are not doing kind of this thing where you're kind of doing an amalgamation. So if we are picking, for example, Robert Downey Jr., we are picking Robert Downey Jr. for one movie, not for his entire run as Tony Stark. And the same follows for everyone else, that we are picking for one actor per movie, and that made things significantly easier, because there are a couple people in my honorable mentions, Brian, who made the list as honorable mentions, and primarily because they did not have a performance that stuck out in one specific movie. So without any further ado, Brian, why don't you... So what we're going to do is we are going to take turns. So Brian will give his number 10, I'll give my number 10, I'll give my number 9, then Brian will give his number 9, and we'll just kind of go from there. So just explain your number 10 choice and why you selected them.
Okay, number 10, I'm going to go with Josh Brolin in Infinity War. Infinity War is filled with great performances. The snap is this cultural phenomenon that, took hold of everybody pop culture wise for a year. The big mystery of how everyone was going to come back. But I felt like Josh Brolin really just stuck the landing as Thanos because Thanos is a really complex character. He's not a very funny guy. He's very serious. He's very like deadpan. You know what I mean? Even if he's just trying to be funny, he's being deadpan, but he's never even trying to be funny in Infinity War. but Josh Brolin really brought that seriousness to the role that it needed. Because if you just had a Thanos in there and they were trying to make him a jokey Thanos, and based on the way Josh Brolin acts, it just wouldn't have worked. But he did it so well that you were almost borderline, accepting his reasoning, which I know sounds insane, but his logic was kind of sound to an extent, even though it is somewhat chaotic and psychotic. But he did such a great job with that character, and he really, and if you really look at that movie, he's the central protagonist. Despite being a superhero movie, they made him the central protagonist. Everything surrounded him in Infinity War, and it was basically his journey to get to the snap, and the way they pulled it off, and then his performance I thought was just really well done. And in a world where the MCU is very, they go for the laughs and they go for that lightheartedness sometimes, he just stuck with the seriousness and really was that badass Thanos, that logical thinker that everyone was like fearing for the last 10 years. He shows up and causes chaos, beats down the Hulk like it was nothing. Very memorable stuff, and I thought he did a terrific job. Kind of got cut short in Endgame, obviously, because it's not really about him in Endgame, but for Infinity War, the job that he was given, he did a terrific job.
I will say that he is not on my list. He is definitely listed as one of my honorable mentions. And I basically agree with everything you just said. I think that for Avengers Infinity War to work, it is really dependent on Josh Brolin. And we have seen actors who get behind that makeup or get behind kind of the digital wares, so to speak, and it doesn't work. I think about Oscar Isaac as Apocalypse, or I think about other examples too. This, it really works out well because you feel Josh Brolin, even though it is a mostly digitally rendered character. Just the great voice and the visual effects team undoubtedly plays a crucial role in this, and that is partially the reason that I did not feel comfortable putting him in my top 10. It's very difficult for me to put kind of voiceover type people, and even though Josh Brolin, there is a performance aspect to it, I did have some difficulty in considering how to kind of place this role. So that's one of the reasons it did not make the top 10. But the fact that they got Thanos to be as successful as they did is certainly a reason to put this in your top 10. I certainly can understand that, and it is very good, and it's one of the better villain performances that the MCU has ever seen. But for me, if as I'm putting this list together, if I'm going to put the absolute best villain performances, this one, quite frankly, is either number three or number four, and for those reasons, I did not feel comfortable putting it in the top 10. But it's still really good, so an interesting selection, Brian. Any final thoughts before we go to my number 10?
I'm glad they did some retcon changes on his look from Guardians of the Galaxy 1. I thought it was a little too cartoonish, even that brief cameo in Avengers 1. So I'm glad they stepped it up and made him look more detailed. I think it added a little more to the performance, seeing that grizzled look on his face the whole time. I think that added a lot to his performance.
Okay, so I am going very unconventional for my number 10. So, with the bottom of the list, I decided that I wanted to go a little bit out there because we have reviewed a lot of very good superhero movies. We've reviewed a lot of very bad ones. But what happens when you get a great performance in a bad superhero movie? So that is why I've selected Lou Gossett Jr. as my number 10 for Punisher 1989, a movie that we probably should never discuss again. But Lou Gossett Jr. in that movie is so good, and quite frankly, he's very good in Watchmen too. And one of the honorable mentions that I wrote down is actually the entire Watchmen 2019 cast, and Lou Gossett Jr. is of course a part of that cast. But he has made my top 10 in a movie that is bad, where the plot is bad. You have this singular performance, and he has so many emotional moments throughout this movie that doesn't work. And I think he personally adds so much gravitas to a movie that desperately needs it. And I am just I'm floored by the fact that his performance is still so memorable. Like, I definitely remember specific lines. I remember specific aspects of his character. And for those reasons, even though The Punisher is very bad, I'm going with Lou Gossett Jr. as my number 10 top favorite superhero performance.
You know what? If I were to make betting odds, I would have said 10 to 1 that you were going to put that on your list as an honorable mention or maybe even number 10. Because I knew, because deep down I was thinking, like, he really liked that performance. And I like it too, but man, I wish I put money on that one, Jerome, because I was kind of right on that one. But yeah, it's totally like, it's such a bad movie, and Dolph Lundgren is so out to lunch in that movie. But man, Lou Gossett Jr. just was just so emotional, and it's most specifically that one scene where he meets the Punisher in jail and he's like starts crying and like, oh my god, why is he getting so emotional in this really crappy movie? But he's just fucking selling it, and they did a terrific job. And yeah, it's also an honorable mention too because I mean, 30 years later, he's on Watchmen in his 90s performing, doing a hell of a job in his performance there. So credit to Lou Gossett Jr. and pseudo cult 80s icon. I don't know if you can say that, but he's definitely part of that Iron Eagle club. You know what I mean? Those straight to not straight to VHS, but those like cheap action movies from the '80s where you need someone serious in the background to make it somewhat legitimate. And there's Lou Gossett Jr. So there you go, honorable mention number 10. But yeah, I'm just kind of I'm not shocked. I wish I put money on it.
So for my number 9, I have to say that what really drove this home is I don't know if you saw this video that was floating around social media, Brian. I may have even sent it to you, but there is a video from the set of Batman Returns with Michelle Pfeiffer and the way that when she cracked her whip and she cracked all the heads off in one take with no cuts. And that really just drove home for me just how good she is. Again, Batman Returns is not a movie that I enjoy very much, but I think Michelle Pfeiffer specifically is still legitimately one of the best villain performances that has ever been a Batman movie. We may talk about one later on. I think both of us are probably going to end up doing that. But for me, I think Michelle Pfeiffer is spectacular as Catwoman. And I didn't know if we were going to get a Catwoman on the list because it certainly wasn't going to be Halle Berry. But Michelle Pfeiffer, I think, is so good in this role, and especially in watching other movies that she is in where she is not Catwoman, this feels like kind of a different performance, and it's very unique. And I can look at some of the other performances in those Batman movies, and they don't really hold up as well. I don't think Danny DeVito and Jim Carrey and Tommy Lee Jones and Arnold Schwarzenegger and Uma Thurman are very good. I mean, Jack Nicholson is basically playing Jack Nicholson, so there really wasn't a whole lot you could do there. But Michelle Pfeiffer is great, and I definitely wanted to get her on my list. And she's kind of moved around the bottom half of the list, but I think number 9 is a good place for her. So Michelle Pfeiffer in Batman Returns, another movie that is not a personal favorite of mine, but she is really, really good in it.
Okay, no spoilers, but she will appear on my list later on. I'm not going to say when, but I'll just say this. Thinking about it when I was putting this list together and I was trying to like incorporate some of the better performances from that era, that Batman era that were kind of like loosely like, we loosely like it for what it is and the Batman 89 stuff, but she will appear later on and I just felt like out of all the villain performances, by far she's the best out of all of them. Even better than Jack Nicholson, better than Danny DeVito, even better than Christopher Walken. You look at that. I know exactly what video you're talking about, and she came off like a badass. And like, I'm just wondering, like, if they would have just, I don't know, it's a one take in the movie, but I wish they would have emphasized that more because man, that's a big pop. You know what I mean? Like when you pop your friends for doing something cool, that was one of those big pop moments. And if you should go out and find the video because it's shot on like VHS camcorder, but it's so badass because it's the opposite view of the take they used in the movie. It's fucking awesome.
And Brian, your number 9, and you can also give your number 8 as well.
Okay, well, sticking with the Batman theme, my pick for number 9 is Batman '89's Michael Keaton. I felt like compared to Batman Returns definitely has the cooler Michael Keaton moment when he's sitting there in the chair. But something about that performance in the first one, back to our I think second episode or third episode we recorded, I think I gave it an 8 or a 9 in terms of his overall hero performance. But looking back even now, even the 3 years since then, since the buzz about the Flashpoint movie, I never realized how much Michael Keaton has been beloved by like multiple generations of Batman fans. I thought it was just kind of this '80s thing with the older generation because a lot of the people you talk to and they talk about their favorite Batman, like they're like 45 to 60, that age range, they're all going to say Michael Keaton. You know what I mean? And I thought that was just for them. But lately, a lot of younger people too have been like really buzzing about Michael Keaton coming back. So it just shows you how legendary that performance really was. And to tie in the fact that he went from comedy to drama and that he had to tone it down. And you kind of see his performances from when he was, I forget the movie, but I think he was like playing a mental patient, and you can see how wacky and crazy he is. And then you can see him in like Multiplicity later on. To see Michael Keaton so restrained and held back and into his head and get into the depths of his like the darkness of the Batman character and the darkness of Bruce Wayne, just him kind of like brooding, like that really sticks out for a lot of people, and it really influenced a lot of performances later on because you don't see that brooding Batman until after Michael Keaton. All we've seen on screen is pretty much Adam West and his kind of like pop culture kind of 60s take on it. So, I think his performance really influenced a lot of performances down the line of Bruce Wayne. And, it's so legendary. I know we didn't put it in the pantheon, but I feel like this Batman performance is so legendary. I have the pop right in front of me. That logo is so iconic. So I thought Michael Keaton just did a terrific job for the two movies that he did do. So I picked the best performance out of the two, which is the first one. I thought he did a hell of a job. And number eight, I'll just go to number eight right now. Alfred Molina, Spider-Man 2. I wanted to have at least one Sammy Raimi performance in this because I was borderline going to pick either, Green Goblin, Willem Dafoe, or Tobey Maguire. But I just felt like Alfred Molina was just um, the most emotional out of all of them. It just felt like that moment when he gets turned into the monster, and then the moment where he redeems himself at the end. Just tremendous stuff. And Alfred Molina is a tremendous actor anyway. And I felt like he really brought, Professor or Dr. Octavius to life. So much so that, like, in my mind, he's more Octavius than even the ones in the cartoon. The cartoon version, again, it's a cartoon, but the cartoon version is so over the top, and that voiceover is so over the top. But Alfred Molina brought this like human element to it that I never saw before. And then him with his wife and him trying to like mentor Peter, and then that tragicness that goes to it. I can't wait till he's back in the third Spider-Man movie. And I know it's this multiple dimensional stuff, but I just can't wait to have him back because I think Alfred Molina was one of the most, uh, one of the best performances out of that trilogy, and one of those like things that kind of sticks out from that trilogy the most. Like I would have, I'll mention it later on in the honorable mentions. I'll save it, but there's another performance that kind of gets looked over in that series that's really crucial. But I'll mention that in the honorable mentions. But Alfred Molina, I thought, was by far the best villain in that series. Number two would obviously be Willem Dafoe, but I thought Alfred Molina just brought it to a whole another level.
I'm going to talk about Michael Keaton later, and you can take that hint for whatever it's worth. And all I can say about Alfred Molina is, of course, I think he is very good. I think Spider-Man 2 is very good in its own right. I know that if people are going to be angry at us for not putting movies in the pantheon, Spider-Man 2 probably the one that people are most angry at us for. But I really like Spider-Man 2, but I don't know, it comes up a little bit short. I think they don't quite get the tone right, and I think Alfred Molina is a part of that, even though I think he's really good. And I totally understand why people are excited for his return in Spider-Man 3 because I know how much that movie means to people. So I totally get it. And I think that if you were to have a performance from the Sam Raimi movies on a top 10, that is definitely the one that I would go with because I think just because of what he represents and because of the character that he is bringing to the screen, I totally, totally get it. So I'm going to give my number eight, and we can talk about this for a little bit, and then I'll give my number seven. So Brian, my number eight is Letitia Wright from Black Panther 2018, and I really wasn't sure just if I wanted her to be on this list, but the approach that I took is before this movie, I did not know who Shuri was. And by the end of this movie, I wanted Shuri to be both Black Panther and or Ironheart if it was possible. So I definitely want to see her more in the MCU. She has had some social media controversy since then, and I do have very conflicted feelings about that aspect. But as a singular performance, this is spectacular. I think there's kind of been a critical reevaluation of Chadwick Boseman in Black Panther just because I think that he does not get to go all out. But Letitia Wright certainly gets to go all out. And this is also not the only performance from Black Panther that is on my list, but I think Letitia Wright is so great. And under the circumstances, I think it's going to be really hard for them to make her the next Black Panther, given some of the social media issues. But just based on what I saw in the first Black Panther movie, man, she would be the choice. And I think just the energy that she brings, she is a white hot ball of charisma, and I hope that that is something that they are able to take advantage of at some point in the sequel. Because again, she is just, as far as protagonists go, she is great in Black Panther.
Yeah, it was tough for me to choose the singular performance for Black Panther. That's kind of a hint for later on, but it these are one of my honorable mentions because I mean, that scene with the shoes, I didn't know that was like an online social media meme thing. I just thought it was like her, but she sold it like so well. And she was like, so, "Look at those shoes, man." I don't know. She was just so fun and like in the parts where there was seriousness, she would kind of bring this lightheartedness to it, but then she can bring the drama at the same time at the end with like talking to her mom and stuff and T'Challa at the end. Like I thought she did a really great job as well. So I'm glad you mentioned her on as well. I was going to mention her in the honorable mentions, but I think that she's like the breakout star from that movie for sure, and probably M'Baku's number two was the breakout. But because everyone was kind of established, you know what I mean. So especially like the top level. But these, especially those two performances, M'Baku and Shuri, like they really like stood out the most to the point where M'Baku's kind of like got his own like cult following now, that M'Baku thick thing, and now people want Shuri as like the Black Panther, which makes sense now. But you can still do like Queen and Black Panther separate. Like it's not always been like one and the same. So I can totally see like Nakia become like the Black Panther since she's more tactical, and let Shuri be the queen, like the tech queen, the smart queen. And I think that's a cool road that they can go down. But it was just really unfortunate we didn't get a scene with her and Tony. But we that's definitely something we wanted, especially when we were previewing the upcoming Avengers movies. But it was just kind of like, you know what I mean? Like they never got that chance. But I think in hindsight, they probably would have tied something together with them because those personalities are very similar. So if anything, she's going to be not necessarily the new Tony Stark, but kind of take over that role as like that tech savvy person of the MCU to kind of help people out. Not necessarily the random engineer from WandaVision.
For my number seven selection, I think that when we talk about superhero movies, I think we generally think of the MCU and we think of kind of this PG-13 universe, and I think that this is somebody I feel that has to be on the list. Even if you're not the biggest Deadpool fan, I don't think there can be an argument for just how important Ryan Reynolds is to the universe of superhero movies and what he did with Deadpool specifically, because I think that he, in so many ways, is as associated with the character as anyone else. Like, if you were to sit down and tell me that somebody was going to replace Ryan Reynolds to play Deadpool, I would say don't do it, because I cannot see anyone else playing this role. And just because he nails the fourth wall stuff, he nails the comedy. I even think he nails some of the emotional stuff in the first and even to an extent the second movie. But specifically, Ryan Reynolds for Deadpool in 2016. A movie that probably should not have worked, but the reason that it does work is because of Ryan Reynolds. He is the MVP of that movie, and for better and for worse, he has started this trend of R-rated superhero movies, and I think they have been a mixed bag. I think even the TV series have kind of been a mixed bag, but I think you see a lot of the soul of Deadpool in projects like The Suicide Squad. You see it in The Boys. So Ryan Reynolds has a very clear influence on the cinematic aspects of the comic book universe. Of course, these kinds of comic books have existed for 30 to 40 years, but I think to bring them into the mainstream, it took something like Ryan Reynolds in this movie. So that's why he is my number seven choice.
It's tough for me because I wanted to put him in even in the honorable mentions, but I don't feel he's not in the top 10 for me personally, just because as fun and awesome as Deadpool is, I feel like in terms of acting, he's not really acting. He's just more being like his sarcastic, usual self. Like if you read his Twitter and you see his online social media presence, it's still that same vibe. So I feel like it's kind of like the Jack Nicholson thing where it's just Jack Nicholson being Jack Nicholson. I feel like it's just kind of Ryan Reynolds being Ryan Reynolds, but that role is significant for bringing so much bank for an R-rated movie that I don't think there would have been a Joker for an R-rated Joker for like $50 million budget kind of thing going on. You know what I mean? It was that big influential, and it led to Logan getting the R rating. So it is very influential in that sense. But I don't know. I just feel like his performance, comparing it to like at least my top 10, like the top 10 I have are way much more higher in terms of acting, in terms of their performance. But I just feel like Ryan Reynolds is kind of just doing Ryan Reynolds. But there are those moments where he gets kind of emotional when when it comes to the love of his life, and then potentially having a kid, and then the whole thing about dying and coming back. So there are those emotional beats, but I just feel like the other top 10 kind of do it a little better. But that's just me. But I just feel like Ryan Reynolds is just being himself.
I think it's pretty remarkable just how little overlap there has been thus far, and I'm very interested to see as we go forward to see if the numbers increase. So, Brian, why don't you give us your number seven?
Well, this is where my Michelle Pfeiffer pick comes in. I think, as I mentioned already, she's the best villain in that series of movies in that Batman era. And like, I'm staring at her pop right now, and it's so badass. The way that you see her making the suit, and the way she's actually sewing, and the way she's like interacting alone in her room with her cat, just stuff like that. Where it was just like, yeah, she's really getting into the role right now. And then by far, like at the end of the movie, it's like she's the most standout performance, and then you compare those performances to like Batman Forever and, Batman and Robin. It's way better, and then I think she's better than Jack Nicholson. So, yeah, I think she's like such a great like villainess. You know what I mean? She's just so good in this, and it's a shame that they didn't really expand on that because it felt like there could have been this chemistry for like the next two or three movies, but they of course they abandoned that and had went in a totally different route. But I just felt like she was so standout from this, and like she's by far my favorite performance out of that era, even more so than Michael Keaton. So
I think there is a way that they could have incorporated her into future movies, and it's a shame that they did not. But yeah, I echo everything that you just said, and Michelle Pfeiffer is certainly somebody who deserves to be on a list of best superhero performances, just because I think she does a lot of really interesting things. And I mean, I think it says a lot that so much of our list has contained some of the antagonists, especially your list has contained a lot of antagonists from movies, and I think there's a good reason for that. I think in some cases the villains tend to be more interesting than the heroes in some cases.
yeah, that's definitely true. Do you want to go on to your numbers, or what are we at? My number six.
Well, we're at number six. Let's hear your number six, Brian.
Okay, so this was tough because it was boiling down to two movies for me. It's Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man, but it was either going to be Iron Man or Endgame, his first movie or his last movie. I'm going with Endgame. And I feel like there's this big climax of everything he's put in his performances as Tony Stark that kind of just climaxes in this movie, obviously, from the snap at the end. But I think, especially at the beginning, when you feel like he just fails everyone, and you just feel so bad for Tony because they lost. And he's like pleading with Captain America, like, why didn't you listen to me? We should have stuck together. You should have signed the accords, blah, blah, blah. And then he just passes out. I felt like he was giving everything in that one moment because it's a culmination of all this tragedy and trauma from the previous movies, especially the Infinity War. And to go into that and feeling the guilt of like losing Peter, and that moment when he hugs Peter at the end is just tremendous. And I felt like all these emotional beats Robert Downey Jr. was hitting. And then not only that, but he's talking to his father in this movie, and to get that kind of closure, it's amazing. You compare the performance in Iron Man 1. Iron Man 1, it's very much establishing that character, getting down the beats of what this character's like, and what the bad things and the good things are about Tony Stark. But I felt like everything was just culminated in Endgame so perfectly that it was either going to be him or Scarlett Johansson for me, and Scarlett Johansson's going to go in the honorable mentions because I thought she did a tremendous job in Endgame as well. If they were going to nominate one person for that movie, it was either going to be him or Scarlett Johansson. I felt, and so I just thought he did a tremendous job, and just everyone was crying at the end. His funeral, I mean, to get that emotion out of a whole crowd, the whole generation of people that's been watching your movies, for everyone to just cry like that, it was this an emotional moment in the theater. It was tremendous.
I think the problem with Endgame is, and the reason that Endgame did not make the top 10 list is I think there are so many quality performances from the actors, and I'm including all the Avengers except Jeremy Renner, who is just kind of there. But I'm including all of the original Avengers. I'm including Paul Rudd. I mean, there's just a lot of really good performances. Like I could also make the argument for Karen Gillian as Nebula. So I think that's the issue is that there's no performance for me in Endgame that stands out. I just think it's all very very good, but I had a hard time just putting one singular performer. So that's why in my honorable mentions list, I'm going to probably mention Endgame a ton. But I certainly understand the importance of putting Robert Downey Jr. and I may have more to say about him later on in this podcast.
Yeah, it was a coin flip, but like I really felt like Endgame, looking back, had all that culmination and like the right kind of climax. You know what I mean? If they didn't do it right, it would have just sucked seeing Tony gone and be like, man, they did Tony wrong. You know what I mean? And sometimes we feel that way about certain characters when they leave and they kind of do them wrong, but they finished that arc correctly. So
So for me, I think that it was I really wanted to not have any repeat movies on my list, and I kept thinking to myself, like, how can I justify having two performances from one movie on the list? And for me, I think Black Panther is significant enough of a film from a cultural standpoint, from a performance standpoint, especially because there are not a lot of superhero movies that have specifically black characters in so many prominent roles. I mean, you could go up and down Black Panther, and you've got Daniel Kaluuya, and you've got Winston Duke, and you've got Lupita Nyong'o, and these are all people that are not on my list. But I think the best performance and the character that has kind of stood the test of time, even more so than Black Panther. And again, undoubtedly, I think the prominence of Black Panther as a character has risen because of the unfortunate passing of Chadwick Boseman. But I think the best performance still from Black Panther is my number six selection, and that is Michael B. Jordan. And I don't think that there is. I think because last year I watched both Fruitvale Station as well as Creed for my top 100, and Black Panther, of course. When I did my top 100, there is just something about what Ryan Coogler as a director gets out of Michael B. Jordan. It's something very different and very specific than anything you see from other Michael B. Jordan movies. I think that Michael B. Jordan has struggled at times in some of his roles, but when he is in a Ryan Coogler movie, look out. And I think this is the best example of that. The Killmonger character, the fact that people kind of see him as a protagonist in a way, and the fact that maybe he is illustrating the political viewpoints of some of the creatives behind Black Panther even more closely than the actual Black Panther. I think that undoubtedly plays into it. But Michael B. Jordan in this role is so great. And if there was to be an Academy Award nomination for the MCU, this is probably where it should have come from for Michael B. Jordan in Black Panther. He is so excellent, and I think there are two scenes that really stick out. The one at the museum, where he spreads out the bodies just to make sure that it looks a little better, and the ending scene that he has with T'Challa, which is one of the more memorable. And in a way, I think it redeems an Act 3 that was definitely weaker than the first two acts, but that final scene just really punches home the importance of that movie. It's great. And Michael B. Jordan is great. Number six for my list.
yeah, it was tough, because I do have another Black Panther performance on this list as well. But for me, Michael B. Jordan and Ryan Coogler, yeah, very much that Scorsese, De Niro, Scorsese, DiCaprio kind of feel. I'm with it, man, because I do think Creed, the first Creed, is like his best performance that I've seen, better than the Killmonger performance. But that's just kind of like I'm kind of soft on the Creed movie anyway. But I do love his performance here, and like I mentioned on the original podcast, like not just me, but a lot of people feel like he's not a villain, and it's tragic because you don't want to see him as the villain, but unfortunately, he's taken things to way too extreme at the end of the movie. So I'm definitely on board with that, and it was just hard picking because like we said, like Black Panther's like filled with so many great performances, but to each his own. But I think Michael B. Jordan did a tremendous job here. I'm never gonna forget him saying, "Hey, Auntie," and just the way he had that smirk. I thought that was just tremendous. It's one of those things that sticks out with me when he's just staring at Angela Bassett. It was hilarious. And then the thing about that camera shot where it starts upside down. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, when it's upside down and it feels like when he becomes king, um, the whole like world turns upside down in Wakanda, so that's why they shot it upside down. So I thought those little things were like very, very well done, and then the little details about his tattoos or his like physical tattoos that every kill that he has is represented on his body, and of course the tragedy with his father, all that kind of thing. I just hope that they don't have that temptation of bringing him back. I think if you bring him back now, I think you're going to cheapen his effectiveness in the first one in this performance. It's going to kind of lessen it. So I hope they don't bring him back at all and get, like kind of christen him as like the new Black Panther, or like take over T'Challa, like whatever, something kind of spiritual or kind of whatever. I hope they just kind of don't do that and let him just kind of be in the first movie and that was it. Because I mean, then you should not have killed him off if you had if you knew you were having a great performance out of him. But that was their choice, so maybe they just have to stick with their guns on that one and not bring him back.
Well, I think that part of the issue is with Chadwick Boseman's passing. I think that is what got a lot of people's interest peaked in the possibility of him actually becoming Black Panther. But like you, my philosophy is that you have so many that that movie did such a good job. You could have Shuri do it. You could have Lupita Nyong'o in the role. Like you have options, and that movie did such. It's so wild to me that this movie had so many outstanding supporting performances across the board, and it's wild to me that Ryan Coogler did not know that Chadwick Boseman was sick, because not like you would think, watching that movie and just how it turned out, like you would have thought that he would have known, because that's why he wrote so many strong supporting characters. And the fact that he didn't is it's pretty incredible to me, and speaks to Chadwick Boseman wanting to keep his privacy, which is totally understandable given how dumb people are on the internet. So I get it, but yes, please do not put Michael B. Jordan in the sequel. Keep him out of this universe. Like, if you want to do a what if scenario, like on Disney Plus, what if Killmonger became Black Panther? Go for it, because that's out of continuity. That is a completely different thing. That is perfectly acceptable and fine to me. Go for it. But I would never want to see Michael B. Jordan playing back Black Panther. So, Brian, you're number six.
Oh, I already had my number six, so it's gonna be number five.
Yes, you're number five.
Okay, so it's Gal Gadot in Wonder Woman, and she just did a tremendous job. And I've mentioned before, like I don't know, like whether or not like her acting is fantastic or great, but what she's doing is bringing that character to life and bringing it to like such heights that like it was amazing to see her performance in comparison to like what she had to do in Batman versus Superman. But Batman versus Superman is structured kind of differently. It's an older Diana. This is the young, naive Diana, and I love that approach about this performance. And then, the stuff about her coming when she goes to modern culture for the first time. Her performance is just so like it's like watching a child, for the first time, like exploring the world, and that was like so awesome to see in that dynamic, and then her like, you know, not knowing how to act in public and that kind of thing, and challenging all these social norms, like it was just great. And then the stuff with No Man's Land, that's iconic. Like I felt like her performance in this saved the DCEU and kind of saved it from like being total, like just total, like because at that time, if it bombed, it would have just been a shit show in 2017. So her like leading this movie and this cast, directed by Patty Jenkins, I thought this was just a home run for the DCEU that it needed at the time. And then her performance is so legendary. I think she's like if people think of Wonder Woman now, they don't think of Linda Carter, they think of Gal Gadot totally. And it's like even past generations, I feel like a lot of people watched that Wonder Woman movie in the theater because it made bank so much money that it just like it answered like all these questions like can we get a good Wonder Woman movie? Is it going to be cheesy like the TV show was? And I think it answered those questions and gave us some really awesome moments despite the third act problems, which a lot of these movies have, these superhero movies. I think she just did a tremendous job, and she's got that movie star quality like I mentioned before. Sylvester Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger, they might not have the best performances sometimes, but they're so like enigmatic and charismatic that they draw you in. And Gal Gadot's performance definitely like hooks you in from the start. And not only like are you enamored as an audience, but like everyone in the cast is like, holy shit, like she's this big thing. She like walks into a room and she like gets all the attention, and she's got this movie star persona, and then she just backs it up physically in the role. I thought she did a hell of a job.
Yeah, for sure. I think what has soured me on Gal Gadot's performance in Wonder Woman 2017, and admittedly, this might not be totally fair, but she was bad in Wonder Woman 1984, and she wasn't great in either version of the Justice League. So I had a really hard time justifying putting her in this top 10. And I think for me, if I'm going to put someone in the top 10, I want to have no doubts about their performance. And I don't know, man, I'm kind of doubting it a little bit. And it sucks because I really like Wonder Woman 2017. I think she's very charming in that role. But I think I really think about just how much of that movie is just really great direction by Patty Jenkins, having a tremendous co-star in Chris Pine, and yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I definitely am hopeful that a future Wonder Woman movie is better, but yeah, Wonder Woman 1984 really soured me on her playing Wonder Woman, which is a really sad thing to say, given that I really liked Wonder Woman 2017, and Wonder Woman 2017 is in the pantheon, and it deserves to be because it is an important piece of history. But yeah, I kind of struggle. I struggle with that performance even to this day. So that's kind of how I feel. What is your number four?
Chadwick Boseman, Black Panther. We've kind of mentioned already. It's this, historic, memorable performance, and just looking back now, how much, with the cancer and everything, how much he had to hold inside, and like, still put on the physicality of the role while being sick, and like just everything behind it, and then, the stuff when like he's arguing with his, with Forrest Whitaker. I forget his character's name, but like that scene was just so like heartbreaking when they're revealing the truth, and then like all the stuff with like the flashbacks, and then you see him like in the soul world with his father. I thought he did a tremendous job there. I think he just encompassed that role so well, and like knowing how much of an important role, for like cultures and generations to come, and like holding all that weight behind him. I thought he did a hell of a job knowing how much and how important this role is for like a whole culture of people, whole generation of people. Like it was just a lot going on, and I felt like he just did a hell of a job in his performance and led the way, and he had me emotional throughout the movie, and then his journey was just tremendous, and then learning stuff. Anytime you learn about past family tragedies that were been like hidden from you, those always are going to be some like incredible emotional moments. You know what I mean? Like dropping the bomb on someone emotionally, like something from their past wasn't right, and that definitely happens in Black Panther. And when the bomb drops on him, he doesn't know how to handle it. He kind of handles it the wrong way. It kind of costs him the crown a little bit, but I thought he did a hell of a job. And then even like the human moments where like he can't act straight in front of Nakia because he's in love with her, like the little human moments in that, and then they poke fun of him, and then like Shuri poking fun at him with that brother sister relationship. I thought everything was just clicking in terms of like all the relationships and all the cast around him. Even him and Angela Bassett had good chemistry. It felt like him as Black Panther just made everything smoother in terms of that. Because if you don't have a solid Black Panther in the lead, you're gonna have a tough time. And luckily, they casted him way early, and like I didn't even know at the time that he was Jackie Robinson, that he was. Who else am I? James Brown. Who else was he? He was all these historical people. Thurgood Marshall.
Thurgood Marshall. Basically, he played a lot of. He basically got into this theme of playing great and important black historical figures. And I mean, the man clearly had a purpose, and it's very obvious that what he was trying to do over the course of the last 5 years was to be his best self. And I mean, it's a hell of a run. This decade is probably one of the better ones that we're going to see, and it sucks that we are not going to see any more. But you think about these last, kind of the last 3 or 4 years, Black Panther, Defy Bloods, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. I mean, that is an incredible run of movies. And even if he did not win an Academy Award, I mean, the guy is just going to be regarded as a real talent, and he should be. He should be regarded as a great talent that was taken from us far too soon. And it is nice though that we do have a good solid body of work that we can look back on and that is substantial. I mean, this is not a James Dean situation where we have three movies and that's it. This is we've got a pretty solid body of work, and I think the fact that he is in Black Panther specifically, that even though it's not Academy Award worthy necessarily, it is one that I think is going to grow and stick with people moving forward. So certainly understandable why you would pick Chadwick Boseman.
Yeah, and then the whole Wakanda Forever thing. It's just everything since then has become so iconic. That movie's become so iconic. It's I know we've listed as both of ours as like our favorite MCU movie, but I don't know, in the last year, since the love and support since his death, it feels like that movie's even grown to a higher level, even more so now. It's even more legendary, and it's such a tragic shame, man. But it sucks. But that's he was my singular performance from Black Panther that I wanted to include on this list.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, I had two from Black Panther, and it's pretty remarkable that that movie has three different performances in both of our top tens. So I think that speaks a lot to just how good that movie is. So I'm going to give my number five and my number four. My number five, I needed to find a way to put Hugh Jackman on this list, and it had to be for Logan 2017. I think you could definitely say that if you were to combine everything together, he would probably be number one or two. But specifically, I think that the Logan performance is one that is very memorable. I could definitely see putting Daphne Keane or Patrick Stewart as kind of in the honorable mentions, but I mean, just this version of Logan is so different from any other version that we've seen in the other X-Men movies. Like, he coughs a lot. He's very bitter. He's even more bitter and cynical. He plays the humanity. He gets emotional. And even when you look at Hugh Jackman in other movies, I think this Logan character is just so different. And there's so much pain. And of course, I mean, the cliche at this point is that Logan is a Western, but I think you see a lot of that pain, and you see a little bit of that Clint Eastwood aspect to the character as well, kind of the lone gunman, one last run, old man Logan kind of stuff. So for me, Hugh Jackman had to be on this list somewhere, and for me, it's one of the best. It's one of the best performances that has ever been in a superhero movie, and I think part of it is undoubtedly the story that is being told. And you cannot get a better image to end a character and end a movie. I mean, this movie literally ends with him dying, and with the I mean, it's beautiful just having the X there as kind of a symbol. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah, that's gonna be later on in my list, but because it was tough, because I wanted an X Men performance on my list, obviously, and it was just like it was clear as day, but I didn't think it was like oh, it's so obvious for me, but I wanted to see if there was other performances that kind of match what he did in Logan, and I don't think anyone comes close. Like some people may like come like an 8 out of 10, but he's a 10 out of 10 in this. Like I want like maybe you know uh Patrick Stewart in the first X Men, maybe to kind of get you like that establishing of what Xavier is and the look and everything, maybe. Um, and maybe even Fassbender as Magneto and maybe like First Class or something like that. But nothing comes close to what Hugh Jackman did, and I think it's because of James Mangold. I think Mangold knows the heart of the Wolverine character, and I think if he was able to do an R-rated version of the Wolverine, it would have been much better. And we've discussed that before. But I think that there's something about Mangold and like westerns, and like I love 310 to Yuma, and I know that's not a lot of people's favorites, but I know that like for me personally, the way that movie's set up, it's like it's very modern in terms of its setup, but it's set in a western setting, and I think Mangold does a good job of doing like the western elements and brings them out in its performance as well, because you definitely get that like Clint Eastwood vibe, like older Clint Eastwood vibe from like Unforgiven and Logan for sure.
My number four is Michael Keaton from Batman 1989. This should come as no surprise, given I have very few Funko Pops. If I'm gonna get a Funko Pop, then it's got to be something that really means something to me. So, just as an example, I have an Iron Man one, I have a Thanos one, I have a Luke Skywalker from The Last Jedi, I've got a Han Solo. But if you go into my office where I work, you will notice that I have a shelf full of Funkos. And then the middle shelf has just one Funko prop, Brian. It is Batman 1989. Not for that reason, but for so many reasons. Batman 89 is such an influential movie for me. Michael Keaton has to be on this list, even though I think he so many times can get overshadowed by the villains. Michael Keaton is so great. The fact that people are so excited for him to return to this role all these years later. I mean, it's almost going to be 35 years since he played Batman in 1989, and he's going to do it again in the Flash movie. And I think people are more excited for that than anything else that could possibly happen. Even if Christian Bale, which I think would be a very big deal, even if he returns to play Batman, it's not going to be as big of a deal here. And yeah, Michael Keaton is great here. And quite frankly, he's pretty great in Spider-Man Homecoming too. Like, there's a scenario where he is on he's if we were just doing Marvel villains, he would definitely be probably top five. Because Michael Keaton's just great. He's just great in everything he does, and it's great that we are getting over the last 10 years we've gotten so many great performances from him. But of course, Michael Keaton as Batman was always going to be on my list, and here it is at number four.
Yeah, that Spider-Man performance is definitely one of my honorable mentions because I feel like if you watch those two Spider-Man movies, the new ones, he's definitely the best actor in both of them, by far. Like Tom Holland's doing great stuff as Spider-Man for sure, but that one scene, like you have to teach someone how to be so subtle and work with your eyes and know that level of intensity. The way he did that scene when Peter's sitting in the back seat with his daughter, like that was tremendous. But when it comes to Batman, um, like if you were to say like, oh man, they're gonna bring Val Kilmer back in the Flashpoint sequel playing Batman, it's like, okay, whatever. If you say George Clooney, it's like, maybe I'm interested. If you say Michael Keaton, the whole world stops and everyone's like, holy shit, that's my Batman. Like I said before earlier, generationally, like this is a lot of people's Batman more so than I thought, and like it's really like, especially now, um, especially when that's like the artwork came out over a year ago of him like potentially being working on the with the Flash side by side, and then you see this like mock-up that Jerome sent me like a month ago of him reading a newspaper about the Flashpoint and the Flash and stuff like that. It's so exciting, and you never realized how much you wanted it until you got these like news that he's coming back and the pictures. It's like, holy shit, this is something I really want. So I'm excited. I can't wait. Hopefully, knock on wood, nothing happens in between that because it's DC. But you never know.
All right, Brian, we are getting down to the nitty gritty here, the top three. This is when we get serious. So, without any further ado, we're going to take turns. I'm going to go through my number three, your number three, my two, your two, and then our reveals of our number one best performances, favorite performances in a superhero movie. So for me, I think that it's almost a cliche at this point to say that it is a great performance just because of the history that is involved with it. When you consider the fact that this person died months after their performance, and people have basically tried to equal the fact that he killed himself with what he did as the Joker. And I think that some people have tried to take that to the extreme. Cough, cough, Jared Leto. But Heath Ledger as the Joker is one of those iconic performances that I think is going to stand the test of time, even more so, definitely more so than Jared Leto, and quite frankly, I think it's going to stand up a lot more than whatever Joaquin Phoenix was trying to do in his version of the Joker as well. I think that The Dark Knight, what makes that movie so great is the fact that you've got a lot of very good performances in it. I mean, just Christian Bale as Batman, probably underrated. Michael Caine as Alfred. Morgan Freeman as Lucius Fox. I mean, there are just so many great performances across the board. But what makes The Dark Knight work is just this version of the Joker that is such a chaos agent, and it really works because the Joker isn't he's not funny in this movie. He's not like killing people because he enjoys it. He just wants to make pure, unadulterated chaos. And from the very first scene in The Dark Knight, you really get a sense of who this version of the Joker is. And the Joker, I think the problem is that the Joker has kind of become too cool for school. And I think an unfortunate byproduct is what you get with these other versions. But I think Heath Ledger's version is purely villainous, and it is so connected to the rivalry with Batman. The idea of I think we're destined to do this forever, which Kevin Steen and Sami Zayn have since taken on that mantle themselves. But Heath Ledger in The Dark Knight is my number three selection, and it definitely was going to go in the top 10. I was pretty sure it wasn't going to end up in the top two, but I think this is a really good place for it because I think this is on the high end of great performances. And while it is unfortunate that we do not have kind of a follow up, and Heath Ledger is more importantly not around to see his daughters grow up. This is definitely something that is very memorable. It is historical, and that's why I selected here for my number three choice.
Okay, we'll get to that in a second because he's a little higher on my list, but we'll go number three right now for me, and that would be Christopher Reeves from the first Superman movie. And as a kid, teenager, I never really appreciated Christopher Reeves as Superman. Not until as I got older that I realized how much effort and how much time it took to figure out the differences physicality wise between doing a Clark Kent and a Superman. It's those little differences that he implemented, Christopher Reeves, that it feels like everyone post Christopher Reeves is trying to do a Christopher Reeves impersonation as Superman, especially Brandon Routh in Superman Returns. But I think since then he's moved on from that. And I far more respected Brandon Routh in the crossover as old Superman than I did as the 2006 Superman. But I just feel like once you try to go away from trying to be Christopher Reeves, you'll find your own kind of Superman. I think Henry Cavill kind of found that. But out of all the Supermen still from the past, Christopher Reeves is still at the top of everyone's lists. And it's so iconic because I think nowadays, even today with the current generation, how much, despite your feelings on the Snyderverse, I think there's millions of people that still see Henry Cavill as like their Superman. But I think generationally, like I think overall, if you took a vote, the number one Superman is still going to be Christopher Reeves no matter what. And he's just done a tremendous job. And you can talk about the job he did in 3 and 4, trying to hold those two movies together and being the glue to it all, despite, the massive problems and issues with Superman 3 and 4. Superman 2, he did a good job for that. I mean, half of it was Richard Donner. So it was still some of that original feeling and wholesomeness you had from the first one. But, there's some iconic scenes from Superman 78 where it's just like that's kind of where the heart of Superman and everyone does the thing where they put him in the fields of his farm. Like that shot came from that. And they took a lot of things from the comics, but they took the stuff from the comics, put it on screen in 78, and they made it more connectable, I felt. And like the way that Christopher Reeves is just so charming and everyone loves him. And it's iconic in that role, and he just does a tremendous job. And even to this day, me, loving Henry Cavill, but Christopher Reeves is still the number one. And for me, the iconic transformation for me is not the him taking the shirt off. It's him like standing up straight from being slouched over as Clark Kent to just standing up straight and getting confidence to turning into Superman. It's those little things that's just like, wow, that makes all the difference in the world in terms of personality. And it does. And it's like the little things like that you can do as an actor that you don't have to like, I've always criticized Superman films for like, hello, it's obviously Clark Kent, but sometimes it's just about the performance and the way you do it. And then we even talked about it in Invincible with Adam Eve. Basically, no one realizes that she's a superhero, even though she's not even wearing a mask. But if you're not looking for it, you're not going to recognize it. So I think he pulled that off really well because there's a critic like me, like who's always going to criticize the fact that Clark Kent looks exactly like Superman. But he pulled it off in such a way that even the people around him couldn't tell because of the slouching, the lack of confidence. But once he takes those glasses off and starts standing up straight, he becomes Superman. I thought that's those little things that actors nowadays don't really do. They kind of go more into like doing crazy stuff on camera and to kind of like really, like Joaquin Phoenix as his interpretation of the Joker. I think sometimes you can do less is more, and that Christopher Reeves did far less to get more out of it.
I don't think anyone has ever done a better job of differentiating Clark Kent from Superman than Christopher Reeve. I think that's what separates him so much from Brandon Routh, who I think did a good job in his own way. But even Brandon Routh is kind of doing this pale comparison, this impression of Christopher Reeve. And I think when you watch even superhero movies up until today, I think so many people are chasing this performance and this specific method. I think you even see a lot of movies trying to capture the tone, and it's not just the Superman movies because I think Superman Returns was definitely going for that, and I think Warner Brothers was so resistant to continue that that's why they went in the direction of Zack Snyder. But I mean, if you think about the 1978 Superman, I mean, the score for that movie was a part of the 2017 Justice League, and they used that at a very specific point. The fact that I think Wonder Woman in 2017 was compared to Superman a lot, and Gal Gadot specifically was compared to what Christopher Reeve was doing in this movie. But I think what separates it even now, even though this performance is 40 years old, what I think makes it work is just how simple it seems, and it's something that you can very easily overlook, and it's something that you could easily forget at times. But especially when we watched this in 2018, it really did stand out just how good he was playing the two characters, the humanity, the charm that he brought to playing Superman. I just can't help but think that this is one of the best performances that we've ever seen, and it's one of the very first ones. So I think in a lot of ways, it has set the template for so many of these movies. And I put Margot Kidder as an honorable mention. I couldn't justify her putting her in the top 10, but to have somebody that he played off so well, I think she is also really good in the 1978 Superman, and their chemistry together is why that movie works. And even for some of the goofiness involved with the plot, I mean, the relationship between Clark's Superman and Lois, it's pretty great. And that's why, Brian, Christopher Reeve is my number two. So your number three was my number two.
Yeah, we're getting on that same wavelength again. But my number two, you already mentioned Hugh Jackman and Logan, and I really wanted Wolverine on this list, and it's obvious like this is the best performance he's ever given as Wolverine, and it feels like it's a culmination, just like it was a culmination for Robert Downey Jr. in Endgame for me. This is definitely a culmination of everything from the X-Men universe through all the pain and suffering, like literally, figuratively, like X-Men 3, Origins, all that shit, to go through all that and to give us this final crescendo. And it was like an emotional crescendo too. It wasn't just like corny, you know, cheesiness that we got from like X-Men 3 and Origins and stuff like that. This was really like, probably the best X-Men movie. And I think highly of First Class a lot, and I think highly of Days of Futures Past, X2. But Logan really just set the bar for me in terms of like, okay, you can still do an X-Men movie, but you can do it with like real drama and real deep characters, and like you don't have to focus on like so many characters, just focus on a few of them. And I think that's what really worked in Logan, because you got to focus on Logan, and then you just had Professor X there to be in the supporting, elder role, and then you had X-23, so you had this generational story going on. And whether or not it ties into the actual X-Men franchise, whether or not, it doesn't really matter. It's kind of its own thing, whatever multiverse, whatever you want to call it. But his performance was just tremendous, and to see him like when he gets injected at the end and goes into berserker mode one last time, that was like the flashes of the old Wolverine. But then as soon as he stops, you can just see him breathing hard and just seeing being the old man. So it was kind of this reality check of like, for all of us, mortality. It's a real thing and we can't deny it. And I felt like that movie really gets into that because, Wolverine has been living for so long and he just wants to die at this point. And like that idea that, you live so long that you want to end the suffering kind of thing. Like that's That's one of those horror movie ideas that I like in like vampire movies, like the stuff from um I'm trying to think of the other movie, the one with uh Old Guard, the Old Guard. They went into that really well, where you're like they're living forever and they're just tired of it and the pain of it all, and that's what Logan really gets into, because the other X-Men movies, they just really show Logan as this badass, and he's just kind of like this, guy that never dies or whatever, and he's immortal. But in Logan, they really get into the heart of it and the consequences of it all, and his performance shows that. So I felt like tied in with like the whole Western feel, the post-apocalyptic, well, not really post-apocalyptic, but post, mutant world, because this mutant world is, a significant amount of the population has died out of the mutant world. So I like that little detail. All the little sci-fi stuff going on in the background because it takes place in 2024. But overall, I think, even Professor X, Patrick Stewart in this movie, probably the best Professor X performance ever. So that's going to go on the honorable mentions as well. But I thought just, tremendous job, and it stands the test of time, his performance as Logan. Like, everyone will know Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, obviously, but everyone's going to remember Logan for that big finale. And of course, like you already mentioned, the X, or the cross being symbolized as an X. Great stuff. And, whether or not they want to go back to that story or not with X-23, because had a tremendous performance as well in that movie. Like, everyone was just knocking out of the park in that movie. Um, Logan is a tremendous movie overall, well directed, but I think Hugh Jackman, going out like that, yeah, tremendous. Like, it made up for all the bad shit that we saw him in the previous movies that we were just like rolling our eyes at. So I'm glad we got that kind of closure, even though it wasn't officially the last X-Men movie. To me, it'll always be the last X-Men movie.
I think we can both have a handshake agreement and pretend that Dark Phoenix and New Mutants do not exist.
Vuck is yuck.
I would say so. So let's get to our number one selections. Brian has talked a lot about the culmination of things, but for me, I think the top of this list. You look at my top four, and it's really been about kind of the beginnings and kind of the tone setting that has happened across the history of these superhero movies, thinking about Michael Keaton and what he did as Batman, Christopher Reeve as Superman in 1978. I think that for me, the thing that has always stuck out about the MCU is just the way that it started. And I think that at the beginning, there was no guarantee of success. I don't think, I mean, Kevin Feige can pretend that he had this all planned out, but you cannot plan out a 23 film journey. And that's basically what Iron Man 2008 did. And that movie fundamentally does not work without two important parts. The first, of course, is the director, Jon Favreau, who, look, he is not somebody who has reinvented the wheel necessarily, but when you look at what he has contributed to the Marvel Cinematic Universe and what he is now contributing in getting Star Wars TV off the ground, he is an important he is an important coordinator of beloved IPs, so to speak. But the main reason that Iron Man 2008 works is, of course, Robert Downey Jr. And I think that it's almost a cliche at this point to talk about him as Tony Stark. I think in some ways Robert Downey Jr. has become Tony Stark, but as far as I'm concerned, Disney should pay this man kind of $1 million for every single year in perpetuity because of what he did for the MCU. As far as I'm concerned, you will never hear me complain about the fact that he was getting $50 million a movie because of what the MCU has made. Billions of dollars at this point, what the MCU is going to continue to make for the Disney Corporation. So, as far as I'm concerned, that is just one reason that Robert Downey Jr. Deserves to be number one on this list. I think the way that Iron Man was framed was so different from so many of the superheroes that we had seen in the past. I think that what you had here was taking a character who was not as well known as Batman, Superman, and even the X-Men, Spider-Man, all those kinds of characters. This was given a budget and this was taken seriously. I cannot imagine any other person on this planet actually playing Tony Stark besides Robert Downey Jr. at this point. I think that those two have almost become one person at this point. And I know that Tony Stark has certainly had a very long run in the comic books, but I can't see a world where it's not Robert Downey Jr. playing this character, and I am assuming that they are going to try to reboot Iron Man at some point. I know that they're going to go with an Ironheart TV series, which is good, but for me, there was almost no doubt in my mind that Robert Downey Jr. playing Iron Man was going to be number one on this list because it's memorable, it's iconic, it is kind of the start of something bigger, and I mean, just the fact that, the way that this movie ended paralleled with the way that Endgame ended years later, the fact that this movie kind of defied the idea of the secret identity, his chemistry with Gwyneth Paltrow, kind of the quips and the humor that he brought to this. Yeah, this was a fairly easy selection for me at number one.
Yeah, I totally understand. And for me, it was like I said, it was a toss up between this and Endgame, and I kind of went with the latter route. You went with the origin stuff, which is good. It's it's diverse. We have varying opinions, and it's good to see it both performances from beginning to end. Because if you put them back to back, you can see it's quite the arc for him. He goes through a lot of stuff, and Robert Downey Jr. Credit to him for all the wrongs he did and all the drugs and stuff, and all those reality checks he had in the early 2000s, and finally getting cast in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, and from there kind of took off. But good for him. And yeah, it's such a wild ride to think back in 2008 of Dark Knight and Iron Man, and how much of an influence that summer would influence the whole summer box office for the next 20 years. So it's just tremendous. And Robert Downey Jr. is so iconic in that role. He does a tremendous job. I just felt like Endgame, just you got more of those emotional heartstrings, and everyone in the theater, crying their eyes out. So that's kind of went with that one. But Iron Man 1, I mean, for Christ's sake, they did a full circle thing with the whole Burger King bit. You know what I mean? Like little details like that to kind of pull off at the end. When he got his daughter asked for cheeseburgers, the same way Tony asked for a cheeseburger. The first thing he did when he got out of the being captured, like all those little details, man. I love that. And Robert Downey Jr. is going to go down as one of the all-time iconic actors just for being Iron Man, and I am Iron Man, and killing Thanos at the end, and all that thing. It's going to go down as iconic stuff. But hopefully he doesn't come back to kind of taint it. I would like cameos of him as like an AI or something like that. I know we're going to get the cameo on Black Widow, but that's kind of deleted footage from Civil War anyway, so it shouldn't be too bad. But I kind of want him to lay rest. You know what I mean? I have the same feelings about Darth Maul in the Star Wars universe. I thought he should never have came back, but that's a debate for a different time. But it's kind of the same feeling I have on Tony Stark. But it is quite funny that both our number one picks are from films from 2008, the summer of 2008, because my number one is Heath Ledger, Dark Knight, and I feel like when this came out in 2008, this was a huge deal, not just for me and my friends, but like when I was going through college and like all my little film classes and stuff, it was like the talk of the town, and like it was just like people were just kind of blown away by Heath Ledger, and then you add on to the fact that with his death, it just added on to it, and it just became, by the time the movie came out, it felt like the performance was already iconic before the movie even came out. So it became this really pipe thing, and then when the movie came out and everyone was just floored and blown away by it, everyone was just talking about Heath Ledger, and it just feels like it was it was such a tragedy, but it added something to it. You know what I mean? And it's unfortunate that happened, but I feel like if Heath Ledger didn't die, would the performance be as memorable? I don't know. It's kind of weird the way we honor some people post, when they die, and when they're alive, they're kind of like treated differently. But when they die, you know what I mean? Things kind of get changed a little bit. So I don't know. It's strange to think about that, but I've thought about that sometimes. Like, would this be the same movie if he didn't die? But it is what it is, and now it's like the most iconic performance ever. And to me, it's better than Joaquin Phoenix. It's better than Jack Nicholson. And it's not just because they're trying to be crazy, but like Heath Ledger is like really just digging down into this, like, I'm not going to tell you my origins, I'm not going to give you any information, the whole Agent of Chaos thing. I love the fact that we never get a straight story from him about the origins of his scars, shit like that. Like, it adds a little mysterious element to it, you know what I mean? And you can tell like Nolan wanted more out of that probably in the third movie, and it's unfortunate, but leaving it as is, it adds a little to the performance. You know what I mean? It adds this like era of, or aura of, like what could have been, but like this aura of like tragedy to it. So all that elements combined, really adds to the performance. You know what I mean? And I don't think Heath Ledger intended to be like an Oscar nominee with this performance. He just went out there, got challenged by Nolan, and said, "Come up with this Joker," and then went into a room for like 2 weeks and came out as that Joker. So, and it's also kind of a lesson in terms of like actors going too far. You mentioned you mentioned Jared Leto doing some really stupid shit on set just because he wanted to act like the Joker, but that's not necessarily what it means to be the Joker. So it all kind of depends. Like I think it's not necessarily you're acting crazy. It's like you're acting in this kind of like mood, like this kind of sense of like you gotta kind of separate yourself from like a human thought. You know what I mean? Because the Joker's not a logical he's not like a human thinker where he's like thinking logically for the greater good. He's thinking, what can I cause chaos for to make Batman go crazy or challenge Batman's ethics or something like that. He's just not thinking straight. So I love the approach to this performance and everything he thought about it. And whether or not was the prescription drugs that made him like that, or I don't know, but it was a wake up call, I think, post because there was I'm kind of anti prescription drug, kind of like I'll take some prescription drugs if I go to the doctor or something like that, but I've seen like prescription drugs really like destroy people's lives, and it took hold of Heath Ledger too much. And whatever it was that he took, I forgot, but it just was a wake up call. And for some of these actors, I don't know if they took it as like a sign, but I feel like some of these actors, like a Jared Leto, will take it too far sometimes. And sometimes you don't have to take it too far. Same thing with like a Shia LaBeouf. Like some of these actors just take it way too serious and way too into themselves, and then they kind of take it too far, and then you kind of end up with like a Heath Ledger situation.
Yeah, I mean, his death is an unfortunate byproduct of what is unfortunately an important part of what we are dealing with in this country: prescription drug addiction. I mean, there was a 4 hour documentary that was just about kind of the opioid addiction that people should check out. And yeah, I mean, you can't tell the story of Heath Ledger without telling that. And that is something that often does not get told. The fact that he did have a prescription drug addiction. I mean, I think that that is something that should be discussed, not in a judgmental Heath Ledger is a terrible person, but because of how addicting these drugs are. Because this is what is killing thousands of people, and if it can kill someone like Heath Ledger, who is a very successful actor, and I mean the guy would have had no, he would have had a tremendous amount of power coming off winning an Oscar for The Dark Knight. I can't even imagine what his career would have looked like after that, and not just the power, but like the options that he would have had, and the kind of movies that he would have been able to do. So talking about that is really important. And it is certainly understandable why Heath Ledger would be number one on anyone's list for best superhero performances. And I think that he is one of the best. And I think that the good thing about both of our lists, Brian, is that it's definitely not all the same. There's certainly there is some overlap. There are some similarities, but we have created two very very different lists, and we have represented a pretty wide range of history and of different years. So that's good.
Yeah, and I wanted to, quickly make some honorable mentions. We've been kind of pointing them out throughout, but one I really wanted to point out is Cliff Robertson as Ben Parker because I feel like that speech in Spider-Man is like so iconic to the point where you got other superhero mediums copying that exact line or making fun of it or doing a stop and go where they'll start the line, another character will be like stop, and then another character will fill in the line later about responsibility. You know what I mean? I felt that this one line that he delivered so well is like embedded in a lot of people's minds. Everyone remembers that freaking line. With great power comes great responsibility. And to me, I think that's the most iconic line in the history of superhero films, maybe next to I Am Iron Man, maybe. But I just feel like everyone, even if they're kids, like everyone, even a 4 year old will know that line because it's just so memorable and it means so much to the whole idea of being a superhero. But I think Cliff Robertson, man, he just did a tremendous job in the 5 minutes he was given in those movies and like the 5 extra minutes he was given in Spider Man 2. Just a tremendous job for a little role like that, but to see how important it is and how much you can even impact the whole society just with one line.
I also had somebody on my honorable mentions from the Spider-Man trilogy, And if I were to say that there is a definitive number 11, it would probably be J.K. Simmons. The problem that I had with J.K. Simmons is there wasn't a specific Spider Man movie that really stuck out. I think he's really good in all three of them, but I definitely wanted to put J.K. Simmons on the honorable mentions because he's really good in the movie. So I'm gonna review over some of the others. I just want to briefly just touch on them and not really get into a lot of detail. Just know these performances are just very very good, but did not make the list for one reason or another. So because it's a TV show, I didn't feel really good about putting the 2019 Watchmen cast. But just know that Regina King, Gene Smart, Yahoo Mateen, and who else was it? Tim Blake Nelson. All three of them, or all four of them, are honorable mentions. Jackie Earl Haley for the 2009 Watchmen, which is not a movie that I like, but he definitely deserves to be an honorable mention. Nicolas Cage and Chloe Moretz for Kick-Ass, Tom Hiddleston for the 2012 Avengers, Chris Hemsworth for Thor Ragnarok, Ron Perlman as Hellboy in the 2004 version, Wesley Snipes for Blade 2, Margot Kidder for Superman, James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender for X-Men First Class, Daphne Keane for Logan, Chris Evans for Winter Soldier and Avengers Endgame, Chadwick Boseman for Black Panther, Patrick Stewart for all the X-Men movies that he is in except Last Stand, Josh Brolin for Avengers Infinity War, Paul Rudd for Endgame, Margot Robbie for Birds of Prey, Gal Gadot for Wonder Woman 2017, although she is very close to being canceled, Brian. Very close.
Okay, well, that's a whole different discussion for a different time. But you pretty much nailed all my honorable mentions. I did want to mention Tobey Maguire. How can I not? You know, he was the Spider-Man when I grew up. So I probably would pick Spider-Man 2 more so than the other two, just because of the scene in the train. You know, when everyone's like, "Oh, he's just a kid," and that kind of symbolizes the relationship between Toby and New York, or Spider-Man in New York. So I thought that's a great honorable mention. That's pretty much it. All I can think of because you pretty much nailed it. The other one I really wanted to mention was Chris Hemsworth for Ragnarok, because I felt like Ragnarok was a turning point, not in just the MCU, not just for the character of Thor, but I think in his career. Because like after that, people were starting to book him as like a comedy guy. Like they kind of booked him as a comedy guy in Ghostbusters. Whether or not how you feel about that movie or not, it doesn't matter. I saw it twice. I enjoyed it. But I think Hemsworth really turned the corner with that movie, and like Ragnarok showed that like you can take a movie in its third entry in the series, completely redo it, and then people want more. And now we're gonna get a fourth Thor movie. Like there's never been a fourth anything. I think not even a Captain America yet. So yeah, I mean we're gonna get a Thor 4 just based on Taika Waititi bringing a whole new spin to a character. Credit to Hemsworth, man, because I didn't think he can do it. Like I watched him before 2017, didn't think he was like a funny guy at all, and he had shades of being funny in Ghostbusters, but I was proven wrong, and now he's got a whole different career path for him.
Yep. So that is pretty much it for our list. We hope that you have enjoyed it. Like I said, if you want to yell at us, do so at Hero Pantheon on Twitter. If there's one thing I know, Brian, it's that lists never create controversy on the internet.
Yeah. If you're speaking of that, I forget. I think it was was it Vanity Fair? I don't know. Someone released the top 10 comedies of the last 20 years. Very controversial, but we could talk about that at a different time because, yeah, stuff like that. We'll see.
That is for sure. So we will talk to you next week. Next week, we are not necessarily reviewing a movie or a TV show. We are just going to do some final reflections on the last 3 years that we have been doing this podcast because we will be taking a break. We will be taking 3 months off. And so we're going to do some final reflections and final things next week. So for Brian, my name is Jerome. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you again next week.
I got worried you're going to put Ghost Rider on the list when you mentioned Nicolas Cage, but luckily we didn't get there.